I sat at the head of the table, where I'd poured wine for presidents, only to have my stepdaughter hand me an eviction notice before my husband was even in the ground. They wanted the legacy. They wanted the chateau. So I smiled, picked up my pen, and gave them exactly what they asked for. They had no idea I was handing them a grenade. Hello everyone, I am Mary. In my 60 years on this earth, I have seen families torn apart by secrets. But this story changes everything. The rain beat against the stained glass windows of the library, like 1,000 angry fingers demanding to be let in. It was fitting weather for a funeral, or rather, for what came after. The storm had been raging since we laid Marcus to rest in the family crypt 3 hours ago, turning the vineyards of the Rossi estate into a sea of mud. I sat in the high-backed velvet chair that had been my throne for 30 years, my hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. Across the heavy oak desk sat my stepchildren, Victoria and Julian. They did not look like people who had just buried their father. Victoria was checking her watch, tapping a manicured fingernail against the crystal face. Julian was staring out the window, looking bored, nursing a glass of the 2015 Cabernet I had blended myself. He didn't appreciate it. He drank it like it was water. "Let's get on with it," Victoria said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She turned her gaze to me, her eyes cold and predatory. "We've all had a long day, Elena. And honestly, this charade of mourning is exhausting." "Charade?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I loved your father for 30 years, Victoria. I built this place with him." "You helped him," she corrected, waving a hand dismissively. "You were the wife, the hostess. But the name on the bottle is Rossi, and that is us, not you." She slid a thick document across the polished wood of the desk. It stopped inches from my hands. I looked down at it. "Notice to vacate." The words swam before my eyes. "What is this?" I asked, though I knew. I could feel the cold radiating off the paper. "It's a generous offer," Julian chimed in, turning from the window. He swirled the wine in his glass, sloshing it dangerously close to the rim. "We're giving you 30 days. Most people only get 3. You can pack your things, take your personal items, jewelry, clothes, that sort of thing. But the furniture, the art, the wine collection, that stays. It belongs to the estate." "The estate?" I repeated. "The estate that I managed while your father was sick. The estate that I brought back from the brink of bankruptcy in the 90s. You were children then. You don't remember eating pasta with butter for dinner, because we put every cent back into the vines." "That's ancient history," Victoria snapped. "The point is, Dad is gone. And without a will stating otherwise, the entirety of the Rossi fortune passes to his blood heirs. That's the law in this state, Elena. You get the statutory minimum, a pittance. But we're willing to give you a cash settlement of $100,000 if you sign this and leave quietly by the end of the month." $100,000. It was an insult so profound it took my breath away. The Rossi estate was valued at $50 million. I had poured my sweat, my tears, and my own inheritance into this land. And they wanted to buy me out for the price of a used luxury car. "And if I don't sign?" I asked, looking from one to the other. Victoria smiled. It was a smile devoid of warmth, a baring of teeth. "Then we go to court. We contest the marriage. We claim undue influence during Dad's illness. We drag your name through the mud until you're left with nothing but legal bills and a ruined reputation. Do you really want to spend your twilight years fighting a war you can't afford?" I looked at them. Really looked at them. Victoria with her MBA and her shark-like ambition, who only visited when she needed money. Julian with his gambling debts and his addiction to fast cars, who hadn't called his father in 6 months before the funeral. They were vultures. They had been circling, waiting for the lion to die, so they could pick the bones clean. "You can't sell the vineyard," I said softly. Your father made me promise. The land stays in the family. It is our legacy. We already have a buyer, Victoria said, dropping the bombshell with casual cruelty. Omnibev Corporation. They want the label, the land, and the distribution rights. They're offering $60 million. We signed the intent to sell next week. You're selling to a conglomerate. I felt a physical pain in my chest. They'll rip out the old vines. They'll mass-produce swill and slap the Rossi name on it. You'll destroy everything Marcus worked for. We'll be rich, Julian said, finishing his wine in one gulp. Who cares about the vines? It's just dirt and grapes, Elena. Get over it. I stood up. My legs felt weak, but I forced them to hold me. I walked to the window and looked out at the rows of vines stretching into the mist. I knew every acre of this land. I knew which vines needed extra water in July, and which ones struggled with mildew. I was part of this soil. 30 days I set my back to them. 30 days, Victoria confirmed. And Elena, don't try anything. We've frozen the business accounts. The staff answers to us now. You're just a guest here. I heard them leave. I heard the heavy door close. I heard their laughter echoing down the hallway. Light and unburdened by grief. They thought they had one. They thought I was just a foolish old woman who had been outmaneuvered. But as I watched the rain slash against the glass, a memory surfaced. A memory of Marcus 3 weeks before he died. He had been weak, his voice barely a rasp, but his eyes had been fierce. He had held my hand and whispered, "The cellar, Elena, the reserve cellar. Look behind the 1982 Barolo." I had thought it was the delirium speaking, but now with the wolves at the door, I realized it was a lifeline. I wiped my eyes. I smoothed my black dress. I was not done yet. The Rossi mansion was silent, a vast mausoleum of mahogany and marble that now felt more like a prison than a home. The staff had already left for the night, or perhaps they had been dismissed by Victoria. I didn't check. I didn't want to see the pity in their eyes, or worse, the shifting allegiance. I walked through the darkened hallways, my heels clicking on the stone floors, echoing the emptiness in my chest. I made my way to the kitchen, grabbed a heavy iron flashlight from the utility drawer, and headed for the cellar door. The air grew cooler as I descended the stone steps. The smell of damp earth, oak, and aging wine wrapped around me like an old blanket. This was Marcus's sanctuary. This was where we had spent countless nights testing blends, arguing over tannin structures, and dreaming of the future. Now it was just a storage room for assets Victoria and Julian couldn't wait to liquidate. I walked past the rows of barrels, past the racks of recent vintages, deeper into the heart of the underground labyrinth. The reserve cellar was kept behind a locked iron gate. I fumbled with the keys on my ring, my hands shaking in the cold. The lock clicked, a harsh sound in the quiet dark. I pushed the gate open. Inside, the air was still and reverent. Dust coated the bottles that lined the walls from floor to ceiling. These were the legends, the vintages that had put Rossi on the map. I scanned the labels, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. 1990, 1988, 1985. There it was. The 1982 Barolo. It was the first wine Marcus and I had made together, the year we were married. It sat in a special wooden crate on the eye-level shelf. Look behind the 1982 Barolo. That's what he had whispered. I reached out and carefully lifted the heavy bottle. The glass was cool and covered in 40 years of dust. I turned it over in my hands, the flashlight beam catching the dark sediment, swirling inside. There, taped securely to the deep indentation at the bottom of the bottle, the punt, was a small tarnished brass key. My breath hitched. It wasn't a hallucination. He had left me a way out. I peeled the tape away and took the key. I knew exactly what it opened. In the far corner of the cellar, Hidden behind a stack of empty oak barrels was an old nondescript fireproof filing cabinet. Marcus had always told the children it contained boring tax receipts from the 90s. They had never given it a second glance. I walked to the corner and shoved the heavy barrels aside, ignoring the splinter that caught my palm. I knelt on the cold concrete. The key slid into the lock of the cabinet with a smooth, well-oiled snick. I pulled the drawer open. There was no gold, no stacks of cash, just a thick leather-bound ledger and a sealed envelope with my name, written in Marcus's shaky handwriting. I pulled them out, my hands trembling. I sat down right there on the floor, leaning against the cold wall. I tore open the envelope. My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and my fears have come to pass. I know Victoria and Julian. I know their greed, and I know they will try to take everything from you. They see the Vineyard as a bank account, not a legacy. I could not cut them out of the will completely, my love. The legal battles would have destroyed you, and they are relentless. Instead, I have done something else, something dangerous, something necessary. For the last 5 years since my diagnosis, I have been restructuring the estate. The children see the assets, the land, the brand, the inventory, but they do not see the liabilities. I have leveraged Rossi Estate to its absolute limit. I took out loans against the land, the equipment, even the future harvests. Every cent of equity has been stripped out, but the money is not gone. It is safe. It is in the Rossi Trust, a separate entity I created in your maiden name, domiciled offshore where they cannot touch it. The ledger in your hands details everything. They will come for you, Elena. They will demand the estate. They will threaten you. Do not fight them. Let them have it. Give them exactly what they want. Let them inherit the kingdom, and with it, the debt that will crush them. It breaks my heart to do this to my own children, but they made their choice long ago, when they chose money over family. You were the only one who ever truly loved the vines. You are the only Rossi who matters. Be brave, be smart. And when the time comes, pour a glass of the 82 and drink to us. Forever yours, Marcus. Tears blurred my vision, hot and stinging. I pressed the letter to my chest and sobbed. He hadn't left me helpless. He hadn't left me poor. He had left me a weapon. I opened the ledger. It was filled with rows of numbers, loan agreements, and mortgage documents. I turned the pages, my mind racing to catch up with Marcus's genius. He had taken out 4 separate mortgages on the vineyard. He had taken lines of credit against the bottling plant. He had even sold the water rights to a shell company, the very trust he had set up for me. The bottom line was staggering. The Rossi estate, which Victoria and Julian believed was worth $50 million, was actually carrying $60 million in debt. It was underwater. It was a sinking ship. And the payments, balloon payments, were due in full 30 days after his death. That was 2 weeks from now. I closed the ledger. A cold calm settled over me, drying my tears. I stood up, brushing the dust from my skirt. I placed the letter and the ledger in my purse. I locked the cabinet and returned the bottle of 1982 Burlo to its shelf, careful to place it exactly as it had been. I walked back up the stairs, leaving the darkness of the cellar behind. The house was still silent, still empty, but it didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like a stage. I went to my bedroom and packed a small bag. Just the essentials. I didn't need the art or the furniture. I had something better. The next morning, I was sitting on the terrace drinking coffee when Victoria's car screeched into the driveway. She slammed the door and stormed up the steps, holding a sheaf of papers. "We need to talk about the transition," she barked, not even saying good morning. "The lawyers want to do a walkthrough of the inventory today. You need to stay out of the way." I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the bitterness. I looked at her, so confident, so arrogant, so completely blind. Of course, Victoria, I said, my voice meek and trembling. I understand. I won't be a bother. In fact, I've been thinking about your offer. Victoria stopped. Her eyes narrowed. What about it? I don't want to fight, I said, looking down at my hands. I'm tired. I just want to grieve. If I sign everything over, if I give you the house, the business, all of it, can we just be done? Can I just leave with my dignity? Victoria's face softened into a smug grin. She thought she had broken me. She thought she had won. That's a very sensible decision, Elena, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. I'll have the lawyers draw up the final transfer papers. We can sign on Friday. Friday, I agreed. Friday sounds perfect. I watched her walk into the house, already measuring the drapes for replacement. She had no idea. She was fighting for the captain's chair on the Titanic, and I had just handed her the keys. The windshield wipers slapped back and forth against the glass in a hypnotic rhythm that matched the frantic beating of my heart. I drove the old station wagon down the winding service road that led away from the Rossi estate and the heavy iron gates I had passed through for 30 years. In the rearview mirror, the great stone house looked like a beast crouching in the mist, but for the first time in weeks, I did not feel afraid of it. I felt the weight of the leather ledger in my passenger seat like a silent passenger. It was heavy with secrets and salvation. Victoria thought I was driving into town to meet with my own lawyer, to discuss the terms of my surrender. She thought I was going to beg for a few more pennies on the dollar, or perhaps to secure my right to keep the family silver. She had watched me leave with a triumphant smirk on her face, and a tape measure in her hand, already calculating how much square footage she could reclaim once I was gone. She had no idea that I was driving to meet the architect of her destruction. I pulled into the parking lot of a nondescript diner on the edge of the county line. It was a place called Sal's where the coffee was strong, and the booths were high enough to hide a conspiracy. The neon sign buzzed and flickered in the gray afternoon light. I grabbed my purse and the heavy ledger, wrapping my coat tight against the damp chill. Inside, the air smelled of frying bacon and stale cigarette smoke, a scent that felt miles away from the oak and vanilla of the Vineyard. I scanned the room. In the farthest booth sat a man who looked like he was made of parchment paper and tweed. Arthur Pym was Marcus's oldest friend and the only accountant he had ever trusted with the true nature of his business. Arthur was 70 years old, with spectacles thick enough to see into the future, and hands that were always stained with ink. He saw me and stood up halfway, his eyes darting around the room to ensure we were not being watched. I slid into the booth opposite him. He did not offer condolences or small talk. He simply reached out and placed a hand on the ledger I had set on the table. His touch was reverent. He looked at me with eyes that were watery and sad but sharp as a tack. He asked me if I had read the letter. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment, as the lump in my throat threatened to choke me. Arthur sighed a long, rattling breath that seemed to deflate his small frame. He told me that Marcus had fought until the very end to find another way. He told me that your husband loved his children, despite their flaws, but he knew them too well. He knew that if they got their hands on the estate, they would strip it for parts and sell the legacy to the highest bidder. He could not let that happen, Elena. He could not let them destroy what you built together. Arthur opened the ledger. He began to walk me through the numbers. I had managed the day-to-day operations of the Vineyard for decades, but Marcus had handled the financing. I stared at the columns of red ink and felt a wave of dizziness. It was a masterpiece of financial engineering. Arthur pointed a shaking finger at the first mortgage. He explained that 5 years ago, when Marcus realized his health was failing and his children were circling, he had taken out a massive loan against the land value. Then he had taken another against the future harvest. then another against the brand trademark. He had leveraged every single asset to its absolute breaking point. The total debt was $62 million. The estate, even with the inflated valuation Victoria was so proud of, was worth $50 million on its best day. But where did the money go? I asked, my voice trembling. Arthur turned the page to a section labeled the Rossi Trust. He showed me the transfers. Every cent of the loan proceeds had been moved into a blind trust in the Cayman Islands. The beneficiary of that trust was me. Just me. Not the estate. Not the children. Marcus had liquidated the value of the vineyard while he was still alive, and hidden it away for me, leaving only the shell of the business behind. It was theft in the eyes of his children, but justice in the eyes of a father who knew his legacy was being targeted. Then Arthur pointed to the most dangerous clause in the loan documents. It was highlighted in yellow. He adjusted his glasses and read it to me in a hushed whisper. The acceleration clause. It stated that upon the death of Marcus Rossi, the entire principal balance of all loans would become due and payable in full within 30 days, unless the estate was transferred to his surviving spouse. If the estate passed to anyone else, the bank would call the notes. Victoria and Julian were demanding the estate. They were demanding to be the owners. And the moment they signed those papers, they would trigger a $62 million bill that they had no way to pay. There was one more thing, Arthur said, his voice dropping even lower. He flipped to the back of the ledger. He pointed to a document that looked different from the others. It was a deed. He asked me if I knew where the water for the vines came from. I told him, of course, it comes from the aquifer under the North Ridge. Arthur shook his head. He told me that 3 years ago, Marcus had subdivided the land. He had separated the North Ridge from the main estate. He had transferred the ownership of the aquifer and the water rights into the trust. The vineyard that Victoria and Julian were fighting for did not own its own water. They would be inheriting $60 million of debt and a farm that would turn to dust in the first heat wave of summer unless they bought water from me. I sat back against the vinyl booth. The waitress came by and poured more coffee, but I did not touch it. The magnitude of what Marcus had done was overwhelming. He had laid a trap so perfect and so devastating that it terrified me. He had turned his death into a weapon to protect me. But to fire that weapon, I had to play my part. I had to let them abuse me. I had to let them think they were winning. Arthur leaned forward. He told me that I had to be careful. He said that if I kept even 1% of the estate, or if I stayed on as a manager or an advisor, I could be held liable for the debts. I had to make a clean break. I had to give them everything they asked for. I had to sign over the house, the land, the business, the inventory, and the accounts. I had to walk away with nothing but my personal effects and the settlement they offered. If I tried to keep anything, the bank could come after me. The trap only worked if I was completely removed from the equation. I looked at the ledger one last time. I thought of Victoria's sneer when she handed me the eviction notice. I thought of Julian drinking my wine and calling the land dirt. They wanted the Rossi name. They wanted the prestige. They wanted the money they thought was buried in the soil. I closed the book. I felt a cold resolve settle in my chest, where the fear used to be. I thanked Arthur. I told him to prepare the final transfer documents. I told him to make them airtight. I told him to give them exactly what they wanted. I drove back to the estate as the sun began to set. The clouds were breaking and shafts of golden light were hitting the vines, making them glow like emeralds. It was so beautiful it hurt to look at. I parked the car and walked up the steps to the front door. I could hear music coming from inside. Victoria was already celebrating. She was playing opera loudly on the sound system Marcus had installed. I opened the door and walked into the foyer. Victoria was standing there, with a glass of champagne in her hand. She looked at me with a look of mock sympathy. She asked if I had seen my lawyer. She asked if I was ready to accept reality. I looked at her. I lowered my head and let my shoulders slump. I made my voice shake. I told her she was right. I told her I couldn't fight anymore. I told her I would sign the papers on Friday. I watched her smile widen. I watched her eyes light up with greed. She toasted me with her glass. She had no idea she was drinking to her own ruin. I walked past her and up the stairs to my room. I had to pack. I had to make it look real. I had to prepare for the performance of a lifetime. The Rossi estate had never felt colder, despite the roaring fire Victoria had ordered lit in the great hall. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, looking down at the tableau below. Victoria and Julian were huddled around the massive oak dining table, which was strewn with blueprints and architectural renderings. They were already planning the expansion. I could see sketches of a modern tasting room, a heliport, and rows of sterile high-yield vines, replacing the old-growth Zinfandel that Marcus had cherished. They were carving up the body before it was even cold. I took a deep breath, clutching the banister as if I were feeble, and descended the stairs. My performance had to be flawless. I had spent the last 2 hours in my room, not packing but rehearsing. I had practiced the tremors in my hands, the hitch in my voice, the downward cast of my eyes. I had to be the broken widow. I had to be the obstacle they could easily push aside. Well, look who decided to join us. Julian sneered as I reached the bottom step. He didn't bother to look up from his phone. Did you finish crying in your room, Elena? We have real work to do. I wanted to speak with you, I said, allowing my voice to waver. I walked slowly toward them, clutching my shawl around my shoulders. About the terms. Victoria looked up, her eyes sharp and impatient. The terms are non-negotiable, Elena. We told you. 100,000 and you leave, that's it. I know, I whispered. I know I spoke to my lawyer today. He advised me that fighting you would be futile. He said the law is on your side. A triumphant smile spread across Victoria's face. She exchanged a look with Julian, a look of pure unadulterated smugness. They had won. They had crushed me without firing a shot. Your lawyer sounds like a smart man, Victoria said, leaning back in her chair. So you're ready to sign? Yes, I said, but I have one condition. Julian groaned. Here we go. What is it? You want the silver? The china? No, I said, shaking my head. I want a clean break. I want a clause in the agreement stating that once I sign, I am absolved of all liabilities, debts and responsibilities regarding the estate. I want to be completely severed from the Rossi name. I want to walk away and never look back. Victoria laughed. It was a harsh barking sound. Is that it? You're worried we'll come after you for running up the electric bill. Don't worry, Elena. We're happy to cut you loose. We don't want you attached to our brand any more than you do. I need to be sure, I pressed, wringing my hands. I'm an old woman. I can't have creditors chasing me. I need it in writing. Fine, Victoria said, waving her hand dismissively. We'll add an indemnity clause. We'll hold you harmless. We'll take on everything. Assets, liabilities, the whole package. Just sign the damn papers. Thank you, I said, lowering my head to hide the spark of triumph in my eyes. Thank you, Victoria. Don't thank me, she snapped. Just be ready on Friday. And Elena, try to look a little less pathetic when the lawyers get here. It's depressing. I turned and walked away, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. They had taken the bait. They had swallowed it whole. They were so blinded by the assets that they hadn't even paused to consider the liabilities. They were so eager to erase me that they were inadvertently shielding me from the impending disaster. The next 2 days were a blur of calculated surrender. I allowed Victoria to bring in an appraiser to value the art collection, flinching appropriately when he handled Marcus's favorite paintings. I let Julian loudly criticize the vintage selection in the cellar, biting my tongue when he suggested selling off the library wines for quick cash. I played the part of the fading matriarch perfectly, fading into the background, a ghost in my own home. On Thursday night, the eve of the signing, I sat in the small guest room I had moved into, surrounded by the few boxes I was taking with me. The house was quiet, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the water, the aquifer. Marcus had been a visionary. He knew that in California, water was more valuable than gold. By severing the water rights, he hadn't just saddled them with debt, he had put a stranglehold on the entire operation. Without water, the $60 million debt wasn't just a burden. It was a death sentence. I walked to the window and looked out at the moonlit vineyards. The vines stood in neat rows, their leaves rustling in the night breeze. They were thirsty. I knew the irrigation schedule by heart. Tomorrow was a watering day, but tomorrow the pumps wouldn't turn on. Not unless the new owners paid the bill. And the bill was going to be steep. I heard a car pull up the long driveway. I peered through the curtains. It was a sleek black sedan, not one of the children's cars. A man got out carrying a briefcase. It was late for a business meeting. I watched as Victoria opened the front door, greeting the man with a handshake that looked more like a conspiracy. It was the representative from OmniBev. I recognized him from the business journals. They were closing the deal. They were selling the vineyard, before the ink was even dry, on the inheritance papers. I felt a surge of rage, hot and sharp. They weren't just greedy, they were treacherous. They were selling our legacy to a corporate chop shop. But then the rage cooled into something harder, something colder. Let them sign. Let them make promises to OmniBev. Let them take millions in down payments. When the truth came out, when the debt was revealed, when the water was cut off, they wouldn't just be broke. They would be sued for fraud. They were digging a hole so deep, they would never climb out. I went back to bed and slept the sleep of the just. Friday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of day Marcus would have loved. The sun bathed the hills in gold, and the birds sang as if the world hadn't ended. I dressed in a simple gray suit, one that looked respectable but modest. I packed the last of my things into the station wagon. At 10 o'clock I walked into the library. The room had been transformed. The furniture had been rearranged, the curtains drawn to block out the sun. A long table had been set up in the center, covered in stacks of legal documents. Victoria sat at the head of the table, flanked by two lawyers in expensive suits. Julian sat to her right, looking hungover but eager. They looked like royalty holding court. "Sit down," Elena, Victoria commanded, pointing to a single chair, on the opposite side of the table. "Let's get this over with." I sat. My own lawyer, a man Arthur Pym had recommended. A quiet, unassuming man named Mr. Finch sat beside me. He placed a single folder on the table. "We have reviewed the documents," Mr. Finch said, his voice soft. "My client is prepared to sign, provided the indemnity clause is included as discussed." "It's there," Victoria's lawyer said, tapping a thick stack of papers. "Section 14, paragraph B. The transferees assume all liabilities known and unknown associated with the Rossi estate, and agree to indemnify and hold harmless the transferor from any and all claims." "Good," Mr. Finch said. "Then we are ready." Victoria pushed the stack toward me. She held out a gold pen. Marcus's pen. The sight of it made my stomach lurch. She was using his own pen to sign away his legacy. "Sign it, Elena," she said, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Sign it and you're free." I took the pen. My hand shook not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of the moment. I looked at the paper. Transfer of deed, transfer of ownership, waiver of rights. I looked up at Victoria. "Are you sure this is what you want?" I asked quietly. "Once I sign, there is no going back. The estate is yours, all of it." "Just sign the damn paper," Julian hissed. I lowered the pen to the page. I felt the weight of Marcus's love, his protection, his genius. I took a deep breath, and I signed. Elena Rossi. I signed the deed, I signed the transfer. I signed the waiver. With each signature, I felt a shackle falling away. With each scratch of the pen, I transferred a mountain of debt onto the shoulders of the two people who hated me most. Done, Victoria said, snatching the papers away the moment I finished. She looked at them greedily, checking the signatures. It's done, it's ours. Yes, I said, standing up. It's yours. Don't let the door hit you on the way out, Julian muttered, already reaching for his phone. Probably to call his bookie. I turned to leave. I didn't look back at the library, or the books, or the view of the vines. I walked out of the house, down the steps, into my car. Mr. Finch walked beside me. You did well, Mrs. Rossi, he murmured. Arthur sends his regards. Thank you, I said. I got into my station wagon. I started the engine. As I drove down the long driveway, I passed the mailbox. I saw the mail carrier putting a stack of envelopes inside. I saw the red urgent stripes on the top envelope. It was from the bank. The acceleration notice. It had arrived. I smiled a real genuine smile for the first time in weeks. I turned onto the main road and didn't look back. The harvest was coming, and it was going to be bitter. The cottage sat on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, about 20 miles west of the valley. It was a small craftsman structure with cedar shingles that had turned silver in the salt air. Marcus had bought it quietly 10 years ago, under the name of the trust. He used to say it was our escape pod, for when the world got too loud. Now it was my fortress. I carried the last box from the station wagon up the stone path. The air here smelled different than the vineyard. It smelled of brine and kelp and wild sage, instead of dust and fermenting grapes. It was a cleansing smell. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The silence was absolute. There were no servants polishing silver in the next room. There were no landscape crews mowing the lawns. There was just the sound of the ocean, crashing against the rocks below, and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I spent the first few hours unpacking. I put away the few clothes I had kept. I arranged the photographs of Marcus on the mantel. I placed the leather ledger in the safe, hidden behind the painting in the study. It felt strange to be in a house that did not require a map to navigate. The kitchen was small enough that I could reach the stove, and the sink without taking a step. I filled the kettle with water and set it on the burner. As the blue flame flickered to life, I thought about the water back at the estate. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. At the Rossi estate, the automated irrigation system was scheduled to kick on at exactly 2:15. The vines were thirsty. It had been a dry winter, and the spring heat was coming on fast. The Pinot Noir grapes in the South Block were particularly sensitive. If they did not get water today, they would start to stress. If they did not get water by tomorrow, they would start to die. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was Arthur Pym. I picked it up and held it to my ear, staring out at the gray horizon of the sea. It is done, Arthur said. His voice was dry and crackled like old leaves. The deed transfer was recorded at the county clerk's office 20 minutes ago. Victoria and Julian are officially the owners of the Rossi estate, and the bank has been notified. And the water, I asked. The transfer of the water rights to the trust triggered an automatic shutoff, Arthur said. The valves at the North Ridge aquifer closed 5 minutes ago. They are electronically locked. Unless someone with the access code opens them, not a drop of water will flow into the main vineyard pipes. Who has the code? I asked, though I already knew the answer. You do, Arthur said. Only you. And me. And I seemed to have forgotten it. I hung up the phone. I poured my tea. I walked out onto the small back deck and sat in a wicker chair. I closed my eyes and let my mind travel back to the valley. I could see it as clearly as if I were standing there. I imagine Victoria standing on the terrace of the mansion, holding a glass of champagne, toasting her victory. She would be looking out over her kingdom, feeling the thrill of ownership. She would be calculating the millions she was about to make from the Omnibev sale. She would not notice the silence. She would not notice that the hum of the pumps had stopped. Back at the estate, the scene was playing out exactly as Marcus had predicted. I knew because I knew Marco the foreman. Marco had worked for us for 20 years. He was a good man who loved the vines almost as much as I did. At 2:15 Marco would be standing by the pressure gauges in the pump house. He would be waiting for the needles to jump as the system pressurized. He would be watching the clock. 2:15 would come and go. The needles would not move. The pipes would remain silent. Marco would frown. He would tap the glass of the gauge. He would check the breakers. He would think it was a mechanical failure, a blown fuse, a stuck valve. He would not panic yet. He would grab his tool belt and head for the main junction box. But Victoria would be too busy to notice Marco's confusion. She had a meeting with the Omnibev executives at 4 o'clock. They were coming to do a final walkthrough before signing the purchase agreement. They wanted to see the healthy, vibrant vines. They wanted to see the lush canopy of leaves. They wanted to see the asset they were paying $60 million for. Victoria would be frantic to make sure everything looked perfect. She would be barking orders at the house staff. She would be arranging flowers. She would be unaware that the lifeblood of the vineyard had just been cut. I took a sip of tea. It was hot and strong. I felt a strange mixture of guilt and satisfaction. I hated the thought of the vines suffering. They were innocent living things. But they were soldiers in this war now. Marcus had been willing to sacrifice a vintage to save the legacy, and I had to be strong enough to do the same. Around 3 o'clock my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message from Marco. He had kept my number, even though Victoria had ordered the staff to cut all contact with me. Mrs. Rossi, something is wrong with the water. The main line is dead. The pumps are running dry. I tried to call the water district, but they said the account has been transferred. Do you know anything about this? I looked at the message. I could feel Marco's panic through the screen. He knew what a day without water meant in this heat. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the keypad. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to tell him to go home and let the Rossi children deal with the mess they had created. But I could not implicate myself. I had to be completely removed. I typed a reply. I am sorry, Marco. I do not own the estate anymore. You will have to ask Victoria. I have no authority. I pressed send. I turned off the phone. I did not want to see the reply. By 4 o'clock the Omnibev executives would be arriving. They would be driving up the long Cypress Line driveway in their limousines. Victoria would be greeting them with her shark smile. She would lead them through the tasting room. She would pour them the 1990 Cabernet. She would charm them. Then she would take them out to the vineyard. They would walk down the rows of vines. The executives would be wearing expensive suits and Italian loafers. They would nod and point. And then one of them, a man who knew agriculture better than Victoria ever would, might stop. He might reach out and touch a leaf. He might notice that it felt a little papery, a little limp. He might look at the dry, cracked earth at the base of the vine. He might ask about the irrigation schedule. Victoria would laugh it off. She would say the system was just cycling. She would say they were practicing dry farming to concentrate the flavors. She would lie because she did not know the truth. She did not know that she was standing on land that was rapidly turning into a desert. I watched the sun begin to dip toward the ocean. The sky turned a brilliant bruised purple. I thought about the acceleration notice sitting in the mailbox at the estate. Victoria had probably been too busy preparing for the Omnibev meeting to check the mail. Or maybe she had seen it and tossed it aside, assuming it was just another bill to be paid after the sale. She did not know that the clock had started ticking the moment the deed was recorded. 30 days to pay $60 million. And now she had a thirsty vineyard, and a buyer who was about to get very suspicious. I stood up and walked to the edge of the bluff. The wind whipped my hair across my face. I felt alive. For the first time in months, I felt the heavy shroud of grief lifting. I was not just a widow anymore. I was the keeper of the water, and I was about to watch them die of thirst. The sun had set completely, leaving the ocean invisible but audible, a rhythmic crashing against the rocks that sounded like the heartbeat of the earth. I was sitting at the small kitchen table of the cottage, peeling a lemon. The zest sprayed a fine mist into the air, sharp and citrusy, masking the smell of the sea salt. I had made a simple pasta for dinner, eating it straight from the pot, because there was no one to impress. No one to judge if the silver was polished or the napkins were folded correctly. It was the best meal I had eaten in months. My phone sat on the table, next to the lemon peel. It had been silent since I sent the text to Marco, but at 8:30 it began to vibrate. It buzzed angrily against the wood, dancing toward the edge of the table. The screen lit up with a name I had hoped never to see again. Victoria. I let it ring 1, 2, 3. I took a sip of water. I imagined her on the other end, holding her phone with a white-knuckled grip, pacing the marble floors of the estate. She would be furious. She hated waiting. I picked it up on the 4th ring. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice vague and sleepy, as if I had already moved on to a life where she didn't exist. "What did you do?" Victoria screamed. There was no greeting, no preamble, just raw, unadulterated panic, masked as rage. "The water is off, Elena. The entire irrigation system is dead. Marco says the main valves at the North Ridge are locked down electronically. He says he needs a code." "I don't have the code, Victoria," I said calmly. "I don't work there anymore. Remember, you fired me. Don't play games with me," she shrieked. "We had the Omnibev executives here today. Do you know how embarrassing it is when the foreman comes running out, in the middle of a tour, shouting that the pressure is dropping? They looked at us like we were amateurs, like we didn't know how to run a farm." "I am sorry to hear that," I said. "But that sounds like an operational issue. As per the contract we signed yesterday, I am absolved of all responsibilities regarding the estate. Section 14, paragraph B. You were quite insistent on that clause." "I don't care about the clause," she yelled. "I care about the $60 million deal that is currently hanging by a thread." The Omnibev rep noticed the soil was dry. He asked for the water logs. "If we don't get the water on by tomorrow morning, they're going to walk." "Now give me the code." "I told you," I said, peeling another strip of lemon zest. "I transferred everything I own to you. If the code isn't in the files, then perhaps it's something Marcus set up. You own the land, Victoria. Surely you own the water too." There was a silence on the line. A heavy, pregnant silence. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. She had never asked about the water rights. She had checked the land deeds, the brand trademark, the inventory lists. But she had assumed, like an arrogant city child, that water just came out of the ground because you wanted it to. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice dropping an octave. "Of course we own the water. It's on the land." "I am sure you are right," I said soothingly. "You have very expensive lawyers. I am sure they checked everything. Maybe it's just a fuse. Have Julian check the breaker box. He's good with mechanical things." It was a petty dig. Julian couldn't change a light bulb without calling a servant. "You are useless," Victoria spat. "If those vines die, Elena, I will sue you for sabotage. I will drag you back to court so fast your head will spin." You can try, I said, but I think you'll find that difficult. I have the indemnity agreement. Good night, Victoria. I hung up. I didn't block the number. I wanted to see if she called back. I wanted to see the desperation grow. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Victoria. It was Arthur Pym. Elena, Arthur said. His voice was grim but laced with a dark satisfaction. It has begun. The water, I asked. No, Arthur said. The bank. The Omnibev meeting must have spooked someone. Or maybe the bank's automated systems just caught up with the deed transfer. A courier just delivered a notice to the estate. My contact at the bank alerted me. The acceleration clause. Yes, Arthur said. The First National Bank of California has officially called the notes. They have notified Victoria and Julian that the transfer of ownership triggered the default provisions of the loans. They are demanding full repayment of the principal and interest within 30 days. How much, I asked, leaning back in my chair. With the penalties and the balloon interest. Arthur paused. $62,400,000 and 50 cents. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. And do they have it? Arthur laughed. It was a dry, dusty sound. They don't have $62, Elena. I looked into their financials before we set this up. Julian is underwater on gambling debts in Vegas. Victoria is leveraged to the hilt on her condo in San Francisco and her failed tech startup. They were banking everything on the Omnibev sale, covering the debts they didn't know existed. They thought they were inheriting a $50 million asset. They just inherited a $60 million liability. What happens next, I asked. Panic, Arthur said. First, denial. They will call the bank and scream. They will threaten to move their business. Then they will call their lawyers. Their lawyers will read the loan documents. The ones they didn't bother to read during the rush to evict you. They will see Marcus's signature, and then they will see yours on the transfer deed, absolving you of the debt. And the water. The water is the nail in the coffin, Arthur said. Without water, the collateral, the vines, dies. If the collateral dies, the bank moves to foreclosure immediately to salvage the land value. They won't wait 30 days. If that vineyard turns brown, the receivers will be there by next week. They will come for me, I said, when they realize they can't pay. Let them come, Arthur said. You are sitting in a fortress built of paper and ink. You are untouchable. Just enjoy the view, Elena. It cost you 30 years of your life to buy that view. I hung up the phone. I stood up and walked to the sliding glass door. The reflection of the room behind me, ghostly in the glass. I looked at the small, cozy living room. It was nothing compared to the grandeur of the Rossi mansion. It didn't have crystal chandeliers or velvet drapes, but it was mine, and it was free. I opened the door and stepped out onto the deck. The salt air filled my lungs. I looked north toward the valley, invisible in the dark. I imagined the lights burning late at the mansion. I imagined Victoria pacing, screaming at lawyers. I imagined Julian sweating, pouring another drink. They wanted the legacy. They wanted the name. They had forgotten that a name is only as good as the soil it grows in. And tonight, their soil was turning to dust. I went back inside and poured myself a glass of water from the tap. It was cool and clear. I drank it slowly, savoring every drop. It tasted like justice. Hello, Victoria, Julian, I said coolly. To what do I owe this pleasure? I thought we had said our goodbyes. You did this, Victoria screamed, thrusting the papers into my face. They were the loan documents Arthur had told me about. The bank notices, you knew. You knew the estate was leveraged. You let us sign those papers knowing we were inheriting a mountain of debt. I let you sign. I raised an eyebrow. I seem to recall you forcing a pen into my hand. I seem to recall you threatening to drag me through court if I didn't sign. I begged you for a clean break. You were the one who insisted on taking everything. You committed fraud, Julian shouted, stepping forward. He smelled of stale scotch. You didn't disclose the liabilities. I disclosed exactly what you asked for, I said, my voice hard. You fired me, remember? You locked me out of the accounts. You told me I was just a guest. You had your expensive lawyers do the due diligence. If they missed $60 million in loans, perhaps you should be screaming at them, not me. It's a trick, Victoria said, her voice cracking. Dad would never have done this. He loved the Vineyard. He wouldn't have mortgaged it to the hilt unless you made him do it. You manipulated him. Your father, I said, stepping out onto the porch and forcing them to back up, was a brilliant businessman. He saw things coming that you couldn't even imagine. He knew that one day his greedy children would try to strip mine his legacy, so he built a poison pill, and you swallowed it whole. Victoria stared at me, her chest heaving. The reality was finally sinking in. She wasn't just broke, she was ruined. We can't pay it, she whispered, the fight draining out of her. The bank wants $62 million in 30 days. The Omnibev deal is gone. The workers have left. The vines are dying. Elena, we are going to lose everything. They'll come after my condo. They'll come after Julian's car. Yes, I said, they will. That is what happens when you sign a general indemnity clause. You assumed all liabilities. Personal liabilities. Julian took off his sunglasses. His eyes were wide with terror. Elena, please, you have to help us. Dad left you money, didn't he? There has to be cash somewhere. If you pay off the loan, we can still sell the land. We can split the money, we can work something out. I looked at him. I looked at the boy I had driven to soccer practice. The boy I had nursed through the flu when his own mother couldn't be bothered. And I saw nothing but a stranger who would have thrown me onto the street without a second thought. There is no we anymore, Julian, I said. You made sure of that. You wanted the Rossi estate. You have it. Every acre, every vine, and every single debt. You can't leave us like this, Victoria cried, grabbing my arm. Her grip was desperate, painful. We're family. I looked down at her hand on my arm. I looked up into her eyes. Family, I asked quietly. Family doesn't evict a widow 3 hours after a funeral. Family doesn't give a mother 30 days to pack 30 years of her life into a station wagon. I pulled my arm away. Get off my porch, I said. Elena. Go, I shouted, the anger finally breaking through the calm surface. Go back to your mansion. Go sit in the dark and wait for the bank to come, because I am done saving you. I stepped back inside and slammed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I leaned against the wood, my heart hammering. Outside I heard Victoria sobbing. I heard Julian cursing. Then I heard the Porsche engine roar to life and gravel spray as they sped away. I walked to the kitchen and poured the cold coffee down the sink. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From adrenaline. The trap had snapped shut. But I knew it wasn't over. Desperate animals are the most dangerous, and they still had one card left to play. They would try to destroy the vineyard to spite me. They would try to burn it down. I picked up the phone and dialed Marco. Marco, I said when he answered. It's Elena. I need you to do something for me. I need you to go back to the estate tonight. And I need you to guard the pump house. The fog rolled in off the Pacific the next morning, thick and gray, blanketing the cottage in a wet, heavy silence. I sat on the back deck wrapped in a wool blanket, watching the mist swirl around the Monterey pines. It was a stark contrast to the valley, where the sun would be beating down mercilessly on the exposed hillsides. It had been 48 hours since the water was cut. By now the leaves of the delicate Pinot Noir vines would be losing their luster, turning a dull, thirsty matte green. By tomorrow the edges would start to brown. It was a slow death, but an inevitable one. My phone sat on the table beside my tea. It had been buzzing intermittently all morning. Calls from the estate, calls from Julian, calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all. I was a spectator now. I had bought my ticket, taken my seat, and was waiting for the curtain to fall. At 10 o'clock the phone rang again. This time the caller ID displayed Arthur Pym. I picked it up immediately. Tell me, I said, my voice steady despite the flutter in my chest. It is a bloodbath, Elena, Arthur said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in his voice. The Omnibev executives arrived at 9. They brought their own legal team and a soil hydrologist. Victoria thought she was just signing the final purchase agreement. Instead, the hydrologist took one look at the pressure gauges and the color of the vines and declared the irrigation system non-functional. And Victoria, she tried to bluff. Arthur chuckled dryly. She told them it was a minor technical glitch. She said parts were on order. But then the Omnibev lawyers pulled the title report. The transfer of the deed to Victoria and Julian triggered a title update. The liens showed up, Elena. All of them. $62 million in secured debt against a property they were offering to buy for $60. So the deal is dead. Dead and buried, Arthur confirmed. Omnibev walked out at 9:30. They accused Victoria of fraud for failing to disclose the encumbrances. They threatened to sue for the time and resources wasted on due diligence. Victoria is currently screaming at her lawyers, who are frantically trying to explain that they didn't check the debt load because she told them to focus only on the asset transfer. And the bank, I asked. The First National Bank does not wait, Arthur said. Since the Omnibev deal collapsed, the bank has moved to the next step. They have frozen the operating accounts. The payroll checks Victoria issued to the staff yesterday. They just bounced. Marco called me. The workers are walking off the job. There is no one left to even try to hand water the vines. I closed my eyes. I felt a pang of sorrow for Marco and the crew. They were good men. I will make sure Marco is taken care of, I whispered. From the trust. We can arrange that later, Arthur said. But right now you need to be prepared. Victoria knows where you are. The deed to the cottage is in the public record under the trust, but she found the address in Marcus's old files. She is coming, Elena, and she is desperate. Let her come, I said, opening my eyes and looking out at the vast churning ocean. I have nothing to hide. I hung up and went inside to make a fresh pot of coffee. I wanted to be alert. I wanted to be sharp. I dressed in a pair of linen trousers and a crisp white shirt. I brushed my hair and put on my pearl earrings. I was not going to face her looking like a refugee. I was going to face her as the matriarch she had tried to depose. An hour later, I heard the sound of a car engine straining up the steep gravel drive. It was not the smooth purr of a limousine. It was the aggressive whine of a sports car being pushed too hard. I walked to the front window. Julian's red Porsche convertible skidded to a halt in front of my cottage, kicking up a cloud of dust. Victoria got out of the passenger side. She looked like a woman who had survived a shipwreck. Her designer suit was wrinkled. Her hair, usually lacquered into a perfect helmet, was wind-blown and wild. She was clutching a thick stack of papers in her hand. Julian followed her, looking pale and sweaty. His sunglasses hiding eyes I knew were bloodshot from panic. They stormed up the stone path. Victoria didn't knock. She hammered on the door with her fist. "Open up, Elena. I know you're in there." I unlocked the door and swung it open. I stood in the doorway blocking their entrance. I did not invite them in. The night was agonizingly long. I sat in the armchair by the window, watching the beam of the lighthouse sweep across the dark water every 12 seconds. Flash. Darkness. Flash. Darkness. It was a rhythm that usually soothed me, but tonight it felt like a countdown. My phone sat in my lap, heavy and silent. I had sent Marco into the lion's den. I had asked a 60-year-old man with a bad knee to stand guard against a desperate man who had nothing left to lose. I replayed the look in Julian's eyes when he stood on my porch. It was the look of a cornered rat. Rats bite. Rats scramble. And when they realize there is no escape, they destroy the cage. At 3:14 a.m., the phone finally lit up. It was Marco. I answered before the first ring finished. "Marco," I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Are you all right?" "I am safe, Mrs. Rossi." Marco's voice came through, low and urgent. I could hear the wind whistling in the background. which meant he was outside. But you were right. He is here. Julian, yes, he drove the Porsche through the service gate. Smashed the lock. He is down at the winery building, the main processing floor. What is he doing, Marco? He has. Mrs. Rossi, he has gasoline. I can smell it from here. He is shouting. He is screaming at the tanks. My blood ran cold. The main processing floor housed the stainless steel fermentation tanks. But worse, it was connected to the barrel room, where the 2018 vintage, the last wine Marcus had overseen, was aging in French oak. Oak is dry. Oak burns hot and fast. If Julian lit a fire there, the entire history of the Rossi estate would go up in smoke in minutes. It was the ultimate act of spite. If he couldn't monetize the legacy, he would incinerate it. Did you call the police? I asked, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I called the sheriff, Marco said. They are 5 minutes out. But he has a lighter, Mrs. Rossi. I can see the flame flickering. He is pacing, he is crying. Stay back, Marco, I ordered, fear spiking in my chest. Do not engage him. It is just wine. It is just wood. Do not risk your life for it. Marcus wouldn't want that. It is not just wine, Marco said stubbornly. It is your life. It is the padrone's life. There was a clattering sound on the line, followed by a shout. Hey you! Get away from there! Marco, I screamed. He saw me, Marco grunted. I heard running footsteps, the crunch of gravel. He is trying to light the spill. I listened helpless, paralyzed in my cottage 20 miles away. I heard a whoosh sound, the terrifying sound of accelerant catching fire. Then a scream of rage. Then the distinct wailing siren of approaching police cars. It grew louder and louder, drowning out the wind. Sheriff's Department. Drop it. Get on the ground. A magnified voice boomed through the speaker of Marco's phone. I heard sobbing, broken hysterical sobbing. It was Julian. It's mine, he was screaming in the background. It's all mine. I can burn it if I want to. It's worthless anyway. It's all just dirt. There was a scuffle, the sound of metal hitting concrete, and then silence, broken only by the crackling of fire. Marco, I called out. Marco, talk to me. They have him, Marco said, his voice breathless. He is in handcuffs. The deputies are using extinguishers on the floor. The fire. It didn't spread to the barrels. It just scorched the concrete. He was too drunk to pour it properly. I slumped back in my chair, tears of relief streaming down my face. He had failed. Even in his destruction, Julian was incompetent. And Victoria, I asked. I do not see her, Marco said. Wait. There is a car coming up the drive. The police are stopping it. It is the Mercedes. Victoria. She had come to watch. Or perhaps she had come to stop him. Or maybe in her own twisted way, she had come to help him collect the insurance money. It didn't matter now. The police were there. The fire department was arriving. The Rossi estate was now a crime scene. Go home, Marco, I said softly. You have done enough. Tell the deputies I will be there in the morning. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat and watched the sun rise over the ocean, turning the gray water to a brilliant, glittering blue. The storm had passed. The air was clear. At 9 o'clock my phone rang. It was not Victoria. It was not Julian. It was a number with a San Francisco area code. Mrs. Rossi, a crisp professional male voice asked. Speaking. This is Charles Sterling. I am the Senior Vice President of Special Assets for First National Bank. I believe you are aware of the situation regarding the Rossi estate. I am aware, I said calmly. It is a mess, Mrs. Rossi, Sterling said, his voice tight. We have received the police report. Mr. Julian Rossi has been charged with arson and reckless endangerment. Ms. Victoria Rossi has been implicated in the conspiracy to defraud the bank regarding the collateral. We have successfully petitioned the court for an emergency receivership. As of an hour ago, the bank has taken possession of the property to secure the asset. I see, I said. That sounds like a prudent move, Mr. Sterling. It would be, he said, and for the first time his professional veneer cracked. Except for one problem. The receiver reports that the vines are dying. The water is off. We have attempted to restart the irrigation system, but we are locked out. Our lawyers tell us that the water rights are held by a separate trust, the Rossi Trust. That is correct, I said. And I understand you are the trustee. I am. Mrs. Rossi, Sterling said, his voice taking on a tone of forced negotiation. The bank has no interest in owning a dead vineyard. We are bankers, not farmers. We need that water turned on immediately. If the crop fails, the land value plummets. We are looking at a $60 million write-off. That sounds like a difficult position, I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. But I fail to see how it is my problem. I do not own the land. I do not owe the debt. I am just a widow living in a cottage. We are prepared to offer you a fair price for the water, Sterling said quickly. We can work out a temporary lease. I am not interested in a lease, I said. Then what do you want, he asked, exasperation creeping in. We need to resolve this today. I don't want to talk to you, Mr. Sterling, I said. I want to talk to the owners, the previous owners. I want Victoria and Julian to come here. I want them to ask me for the water. Mrs. Rossi, they are currently in police custody. Then bail them out, I interrupted. Or bring them in shackles, I don't care. But the water stays off until they stand in my living room and understand exactly what they threw away. And Mr. Sterling, bring the foreclosure deed. I have a feeling you're going to want to sell the asset quickly to someone who knows how to run it. There was a long silence on the line. I will see what I can do, he said. I hung up. I walked to the safe in the study and spun the dial. I took out the leather ledger Marcus had left me. I opened it to the very last page. There was one document I hadn't looked at closely before. It was a purchase option. Marcus had thought of everything. He had given me the right of first refusal to buy back the estate in the event of a foreclosure for the value of the outstanding debt, minus the value of the water rights. Since I owned the water rights and the water rights were valued at, I checked the column, $40 million. That meant I could buy back my $50 million estate for $20 million, the exact amount sitting in the offshore trust Marcus had funded with the loans. I closed the book. The circle was almost complete. I went to the kitchen and began to prepare a tray of tea and cookies. I was expecting company, and this time I would be the one holding the pen. The procession arrived at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, under a sky that was painfully blue. It was not the flashy entrance Victoria and Julian were used to making. There were no sports cars revving their engines, and no music blaring from open windows. Instead, 2 black town cars wound their way up the gravel drive, followed closely by a sheriff's cruiser. They looked like a funeral cortege for the living. I watched them from the porch of my cottage, standing with a posture that would have made Marcus proud. I was wearing the pearl necklace he gave me for our 25th anniversary, and a dress the color of deep burgundy wine. I was not the victim today. I was the judge and the jury, and the executioner. The lead car stopped, and a man in a charcoal suit stepped out. He smoothed his tie with a nervous gesture that betrayed his calm exterior. This was Mr. Sterling from the bank. He looked at the cottage and then at the ocean and then at me. He looked like a man who realized he had walked into a trap that was far more sophisticated than a simple foreclosure. The second car opened and my stepchildren emerged. I almost did not recognize them. Victoria was wearing the same suit she had worn yesterday, but it was crumpled and stained. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, revealing the dark circles of exhaustion and terror etched under her eyes. She did not look at me. She looked at the ground, She looked at her shoes. She looked anywhere but at the woman she had tried to destroy. Julian was in worse shape. He was handcuffed. A deputy walked behind him holding his elbow. He still smelled of smoke and gasoline, a sharp chemical stench that cut through the salt air. His hands were shaking violently, and his skin had the gray pallor of someone going through withdrawal. They shuffled up the stone path like prisoners walking to the gallows. Mrs. Rossi, Mr. Sterling said, climbing the steps. He did not offer his hand. Thank you for agreeing to see us. This is highly irregular, given the ongoing criminal investigation, but the bank felt it was necessary to facilitate a resolution before the asset degrades further. You mean before the vines die completely, I said. My voice was cool and carried over the sound of the waves. Please come in. We have much to discuss. I led them into the small living room. It was intimate and bright, filled with the afternoon sun. I sat in the single armchair by the window. I did not offer them seats. Mr. Sterling stood by the fireplace. Victoria and Julian stood near the door, huddled together like frightened children. The deputy waited outside on the porch, his silhouette visible through the screen door. The silence in the room was heavy. It was the silence of a debt coming due. Here is the situation. Mr. Sterling began opening his leather portfolio. As of this morning, First National Bank has exercised its right to accelerate the loans against the Rossi estate. Since the borrowers, Ms. Rossi and Mr. Rossi, are unable to pay the $62 million balance and are currently facing felony charges for arson and fraud, the bank has seized the property. We are now the legal owners of the land, the buildings, and the inventory. Congratulations, I said. It is a beautiful property. I hope you enjoy farming. Mr. Sterling flinched. We do not farm, Mrs. Rossi. We liquidate. However, we cannot liquidate a vineyard that has no water. Our appraisers tell us that without the aquifer access, the land is worth a fraction of the debt. It is essentially worthless agricultural land. We need you to turn the water back on. Immediately. I see, I said. I looked at Victoria. She was trembling. And what does this have to do with them? Why are they here? Because Mr. Sterling said, looking at the siblings with disdain, they are personally liable for the shortfall. The indemnity clause they signed with you transferred the debt to them, but the bank still holds the right to pursue the guarantor. Since the collateral is failing, we are preparing to seize their personal assets, their homes, their accounts, their future wages. Unless we can salvage the value of the vineyard, they will be destitute for the rest of their lives. I turned my gaze to Victoria. She finally looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed and filled with a despair so deep, it looked like a physical wound. She stepped forward. Her voice was a broken whisper. Elena, she said, please, I didn't know about the water. I didn't know about the debt. We just wanted what Dad left us. You wanted the money, I corrected her gently. You didn't care about what your father left. You wanted to sell his legacy to a corporation for parts. You wanted to strip the name off the bottle and fill your bank accounts. And when you realized you couldn't do that, you tried to burn it down. I looked at Julian. He was staring at the floor, tears leaking silently down his cheeks. He looked so young and so stupid. I didn't mean to, he sobbed. I was scared. I owe people money, Elena, bad people. If I don't pay them, they are going to kill me. And now you owe the bank $60 million, I said. I don't think your bookie is your biggest problem anymore. Mrs. Rossi, Mr. Sterling interrupted, his patience wearing thin. We are wasting time. The bank is prepared to offer you $5 million for the water rights. It is a generous offer. It will allow you to live comfortably, and it will save the estate. $5 million, I repeated. I stood up and walked to the safe in the corner. I spun the dial. Left to 19. Right to 82. Left to 30. The heavy door swung open. I reached inside and pulled out the leather ledger. I placed it on the coffee table. You haven't done your homework, Mr. Sterling, I said. Marcus Rossi didn't just separate the water rights. He created a buyback option, a right of first refusal for the trustee, in the event of a foreclosure. Mr. Sterling frowned. He stepped forward and looked at the document I had opened to. He read the clause, his eyes widened. He looked at me with new respect and a dawn of realization. The option allows the trustee to purchase the estate for the value of the outstanding debt, minus the appraised value of the water rights, I said, reciting the terms from memory. The debt is $62 million. The water rights, which you just admitted are essential, are valued at $42 million in this ledger. That leaves a balance of $20 million. You want to buy it back? Sterling asked. But Mrs. Rossi, do you have $20 million liquid? The bank requires cash. We will not finance this. I looked at Victoria. She was watching me with her mouth slightly open. She was realizing for the first time that the game had been rigged from the start. She was realizing that while she was playing checkers, her father had been playing three-dimensional chess. The money is in the Rossi Trust, one said. The very same money Marcus borrowed against the land 5 years ago. He didn't spend it, Victoria. He didn't lose it, he saved it. He put it away for this exact moment. He knew you would drive the estate into the ground. He knew you would default. He financed his own repurchase with the bank's money. I turned back to Mr. Sterling. I am prepared to wire the funds today, I said. $20 million. In exchange, I want the deed to the Rossi estate returned to me, free and clear, no debt, no liens. And I want these two, I gestured to the trembling heirs, to sign a document acknowledging that they have no claim to the Rossi name ever again. And the deficiency, Sterling asked, the remaining debt. That, I said, looking at Julian's handcuffs, is between you and them. They signed the personal guarantee. They assumed the liability. I am just buying the asset. The room went silent. The sound of the ocean seemed to roar louder. Victoria let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She fell to her knees on the rug. She understood. She finally understood. I wasn't just taking the vineyard back. I was leaving them with the consequences of their greed. I was saving the land, but I was letting them drown. Please, she begged, clutching at the hem of my skirt. Elena, please. You can't leave us with the debt. It will destroy us. I will lose my condo. I will go to prison for fraud. Help us, we are family. I looked down at her. I remembered the rain on the window of the library. I remembered her voice telling me I had 30 days to vacate. I remembered the eviction notice. You are right, I said softly. You are family. And that is why I am going to give you one final gift. I looked at Victoria kneeling on my rug, her expensive suit ruined, her pride stripped away. Then I looked at Julian, the boy I had raised, now a criminal in handcuffs. They were broken. Marcus had broken them, not out of cruelty but out of necessity. He had shattered their entitlement so that they might finally learn how to survive. The room was silent, except for the grandfather clock, ticking away the seconds of their old lives. Mr. Sterling watched me, his pen poised over his portfolio, waiting to see just how much mercy I possessed. The gift, I said, walking over to the small writing desk in the corner, is freedom. But not the kind you think. I opened the drawer and pulled out a checkbook. It was the checkbook for the Rossi Trust. I uncapped Marcus's gold pen, the one Victoria had forced into my hand just days ago, and I began to write. The scratching of the nib on the paper sounded loud in the quiet room. I wrote the date. I wrote the name Victoria and Julian Rossi, and then I wrote the amount. I tore the check from the book with a sharp rip. I walked back to them and held it out. $100,000, I said, my voice steady. That was the price you put on my life. That was the value you assigned to 30 years of marriage, to the woman who nursed you when you were sick, to the mother who raised you. You told me it was a generous offer. You told me to take it and leave quietly. Victoria stared at the check. Her hands were trembling too much to take it. I placed it on the table in front of her. I am going to execute the buyback option. I told Mr. Sterling, turning my back on them. I will transfer the $20 million to the bank this afternoon. In exchange, you will release the deed to the Rossi estate back to the trust. Since the debt will be satisfied, the bank will have no reason to pursue the deficiency judgment against Victoria and Julian. You will drop the civil fraud charges. Mr. Sterling nodded slowly, a look of admiration crossing his stoic face. If the debt is cleared, the bank considers the matter closed. We have no interest in ruining people for sport, Mrs. Rossi, only in recovering our capital. But I continued, turning back to my stepchildren, this does not fix everything. Julian, you still committed arson. You will have to face the district attorney for that. I will not interfere. If you go to prison, you go to prison. It might be the best thing for you. And Victoria, you are broke. You lost your job, your reputation, and your inheritance. This check. This $100,000. That is all you have. It is your restart fund. Use it wisely, because there will not be another penny. Victoria reached out and touched the check. Her fingers brushed the paper. She looked up at me, and for the first time in her life, I saw genuine humility in her eyes. It was a painful, raw look. She realized that I had just saved her from bankruptcy, from homelessness, from a life of debt she could never repay. And I had done it with the very sum she had used to insult me. Thank you, she whispered. The words were choked, barely audible. Thank you, Elena. Don't thank me, I said coldly. Thank your father. He knew you better than you knew yourselves. I signaled to the deputy. Please take them away. I have business to conclude with Mr. Sterling. Julian looked at me one last time, as the deputy guided him toward the door. He looked smaller, lighter, as if the crushing weight of the vineyard had finally been lifted from his shoulders. I'm sorry, Elena, he croaked, about the wine, about everything. I know, I said. Goodbye, Julian. They walked out of the cottage and into the back of the squad car. I watched them go. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt a profound sense of closure. The wound had been cauterized. The next hour was spent in a flurry of wire transfers and digital signatures. Mr. Sterling was efficient. By 4 o'clock, the funds had moved from the Cayman Islands to the First National Bank. The deed was electronically recorded. The Rossi estate belonged to me again, not as a widow, but as the sole owner of the Rossi Trust. When Mr. Sterling finally left, his black town car disappearing down the drive, I was alone again. But the silence felt different now. It wasn't the silence of waiting. It was the silence of peace. I picked up the phone and dialed Marco. Mrs. Rossi, his voice was anxious. What is happening? The police are gone, but the gates are still locked. Open them, Marco, I said. Turn the valves at the north ridge. I am sending the unlock code to your phone right now. Water the vines. Give them a deep soak. They have been thirsty for too long. You bought it back, Marco asked, hope rising in his voice. We never really lost it, Marco, I said. I'm coming home. 6 months later, the harvest came early. The heat spike in August had accelerated the ripening, but the deep watering we had done in the spring had saved the crop. The grapes were small, concentrated, and intensely flavorful. It would be a small vintage, but a legendary one. I stood on the terrace of the mansion, watching the crew move through the rows. The rhythmic snip-snip of the shears was music to my ears. Marco was down there directing the bins, his limp almost gone, now that he had his purpose back. I wasn't living in the mansion anymore. I had decided to turn the main house into a visitor center and museum dedicated to the history of California winemaking. I kept a small apartment in the East Wing, but I preferred the cottage by the sea. I split my time now. 3 days at the vineyard, 4 days at the ocean. It was a balance Marcus would have appreciated. Victoria was working in Seattle. She had taken a job as a mid-level manager at a logistics firm. It was humble work, unglamorous, but she wrote to me occasionally. She was paying her rent. She was learning to live within her means. Julian was in a minimum security facility 2 hours away, serving 18 months for the arson attempt. He was attending AA meetings and working in the prison library. He looked better in the photos he sent than he had in years. They were not the children Marcus had dreamed of, but they were no longer the monsters they had allowed themselves to become. I walked down to the cellar. The scorch marks on the floor of the processing room had been scrubbed away, though a faint shadow remained on the concrete, a reminder of how close we had come to losing it all. I unlocked the gate to the reserve cellar. The air was cool and smelled of history. I walked to the alcove where the 1982 Barolo sat. I took the bottle down. It was covered in dust, the label yellowed with age. I carried it upstairs to the terrace. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of violet and gold. I uncorked the bottle. The cork was soft but it held. I poured a single glass. The wine was a deep brick red, the color of dried blood and old roses. I swirled it, releasing the aromas of tar, cherries, and earth. I held the glass up to the dying light. To the poison pill, I whispered. I took a sip. It was magnificent. It tasted of struggle and endurance, and the sweetness of survival. It tasted of Marcus. I sat there until the stars came out, watching the lights of the valley twinkle on one by one. I was Elena Rossi. I was the keeper of the water. I was the guardian of the soil. And as the night wind rustled through the vines, whispering secrets to the grapes, I knew that the legacy was safe. The roots were deep, and they would hold fast against any storm.